market was alive with noise, with voices shouting prices, with merchants showing strange goods, with the smell of food drifting through the air. But in the middle of the busy road, where shadows from high walls fell heavy, a small figure sat on the ground. It was a child, her skin pale and marked with strange alien lines, her body thin like dry sticks, her eyes too big for her face. She pressed her small hands to her stomach, which growled with hunger. Passers-by did not stop. Some looked at her and laughed. Others pointed and whispered cruel words. "Look at that creature," one alien said with a sneer. "She should crawl back to the trash where she belongs," another added. The child lowered her head, her eyes filling with tears. She had not eaten for days, and every sound of laughter cut deeper than hunger. A group of young aliens gathered nearby, holding pieces of bread and roasted meat. They waved the food in front of her, pretending to offer it, then snatched it back and laughed loudly. "Hungry little beast," one shouted. "Beg for it." The child did not move, too weak to stand, too broken to beg anymore. Her stomach twisted again, the sound lost under the crowd's noise. Then through the busy walkway came a man. He was human, tall, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a small pack over his shoulder. His steps were steady, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet alertness. Most ignored him, for humans were not common in this part of the galaxy, but those who noticed him looked with a mix of distrust and curiosity. He had the look of a traveler, one who had walked through many stars with little more than his courage and his pack. As he passed the mocking group, his gaze fell upon the child. For a moment he stopped, his brow furrowing. He saw her trembling hands, her hollow cheeks, and the cruel faces of those who mocked her. He tightened his jaw, his hand resting on the strap of his pack. Something inside him stirred, something that refused to let him walk away. The crowd kept moving. No one cared for the starving child. But the human's steps grew slower, his thoughts heavy. Inside his pack was a single ration, a small packet of dried food, his last meal for the journey ahead. If he gave it away, he would be the one hungry, alone in the cold night of a strange planet. But if he did nothing, the child would not survive another day. The voices of the mocking aliens reached him again. "Look, even the human sees the beast," one sneered. Will he laugh too? Or will he step over her like the rest of us? The laughter rose, filling the air like poison. The child's head lifted slightly, her tired eyes meeting his for a heartbeat. In that single glance, he saw not a beast but a frightened soul. Abandoned by the world, her eyes begged silently. Though her lips did not move, the human felt the weight of choice pressing on him. The ration in his pack seemed heavier than ever before. He thought of the nights he had survived on Little, the long walks under alien skies, the hunger that had clawed at him many times before, but he had always endured. And this child, this fragile stranger, might not. His fists clenched, his mind torn between reason and heart. The crowd grew louder, sensing the tension. "Walk away." "Human," one shouted. "She is nothing. Not worth your pity," another barked. Still he stood, silent, his eyes locked on the child. His breath grew slow, his chest rising and falling with the weight of decision. Time stretched, every second pulling tighter, the laughter mixing with the child's soft whimper. Then, with a sudden motion, he took the pack from his shoulder. The mocking voices fell quiet for a moment, watching with curious eyes. He opened the flap, his hand reaching inside, pulling out the ration, his last meal. Gasps spread through the crowd, whispers rising. Is he truly going to waste it on her? He must be mad, someone muttered. The child blinked, confusion on her face. Her eyes followed his hand as he knelt down slowly. Lowering himself to her level, the packet rested in his palm. Stretched out toward her, her heart raced, unsure if this was another cruel trick. The crowd leaned closer, their eyes hungry for the answer. The human's voice broke the silence, steady and low. "Eat," he said. "It is yours." Suspense wrapped the moment. The child's trembling fingers reached out. Still unsure if she could trust, the crowd waited, holding their breath. And the human's hand did not move away, his eyes calm, refusing to let cruelty win. The scene froze like a picture, a starving child, a mocking crowd, and a human offering his last meal. What would happen next, no one could say. But in that moment, the air shifted, the laughter fading, the cruelty silenced, and for the first time the child saw hope standing before her. The marketplace still buzzed with whispers, the sound of voices carrying judgment, confusion, and disbelief. The human knelt on the dusty ground, his hand still stretched out with the small ration. His eyes fixed on the fragile child before him. She looked at the food like it was a dream she did not trust. Her lips quivering, her thin arms shaking. The crowd leaned closer, eager to see if the human would truly give away the only thing that kept him alive. The mocking aliens laughed again, though their laughter was weaker now. "Foolish human," one said. "Your kindness is wasted." "Give her food and she will bite your hand," another muttered. But deep inside, the human did not hear them anymore. His mind was far away, wrestling with the choice before him. He remembered nights when hunger had gnawed at him, on distant moons where winds howled and no fire could stay lit. He had eaten the last crumbs of his ration. He had survived because he endured the pain. Now before him sat someone who might not endure, a child who might die if he turned his back. The ration in his hand felt heavier than iron. It was not only food, it was survival, it was safety. It was the promise of one more day on a dangerous road. But it was also something more now. It was a test, a question the universe had placed before him. Would he cling to it for himself or give it away to someone weaker? The child's eyes lifted slowly, meeting his gaze. Her alien features were strange to others, but to him, they were simply the face of innocence. Her eyes were glassy with tears, and in them he saw both fear and a desperate hope. She whispered something so faint only he could hear it. "Please." His heart tightened at the sound. The choice no longer felt like survival. It felt like destiny. The human did not think of tomorrow's hunger. He thought only of this moment, of the cruelty of the crowd, of the trembling child, of the chance to make a difference. He pushed the ration gently into her hands. The crowd gasped, voices rising in shock. "He gave it," one said in disbelief. "He gave his last meal to a beast," another hissed. But the human stood firm, his hand lingering to steady the child's weak fingers. "It is yours," he repeated, his voice steady. The child stared at the packet, her hands shaking. She sniffed it as if unsure it was real, then tore it open slowly. The first bite was small, but as soon as it touched her tongue, her body remembered hunger. She devoured the food with desperate speed, tears running down her cheeks. The crowd was silent now. Watching her eat for the first time, no one laughed, no one mocked. They only stared at the human who had given away his own survival for a stranger. The man rose to his feet, his face calm, though his stomach already knew what he had lost. He would be hungry tonight. His journey harder, but he did not regret it. Something inside him told him he had done the only right thing. The child looked up at him, crumbs on her lips, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you." The silence of the marketplace was broken by angry voices. A group of aliens stepped forward, their faces twisted with rage. "You shame us, human," one shouted. "You dare treat this beast as one of us," another growled. "You think your pity makes you noble? It makes you weak." The tension grew heavy, as if the air itself pressed down on everyone. But the human did not flinch, his eyes cold as steel. "I see a child," he said simply, his voice echoing through the market. Nothing less, nothing more. The words cut deep, stirring whispers among the crowd. Some looked away, ashamed, while others scowled with anger. The child clutched the empty packet to her chest, her body trembling not from hunger now, but from fear of what might come next. The human noticed, and without hesitation, he stepped closer to her. His presence was like a shield, a silent promise that no hand would harm her while he stood near. The mocking aliens backed away, but their eyes burned with hatred. This act of kindness had challenged their cruelty, and they did not forgive easily. The human knew this, but he did not care. He had chosen his path, and he would not turn back. For a long moment, the marketplace was frozen, every eye fixed on the strange pair. A human who had given away his last meal, and a child who had found hope in his hands. Then slowly the crowd began to break apart, whispers spreading like fire. Some voices were angry, some thoughtful, some even admiring, but no one could deny what they had seen. As the human lifted the child gently into his arms, her head resting against his shoulder, he felt her tiny heartbeat against his chest. It was weak, but it was there, alive. He turned away from the marketplace, his steps firm. The road ahead would be harder now, with no food and many eyes watching him. But he felt no regret, for in his heart he knew he had made the only choice that mattered. Behind him the marketplace whispered with unease, but ahead of him something new waited, though he could not yet see it. Hope, danger, and destiny walked with him now. And the story of the starving alien child and the human who shared his last meal had only just begun. The child held the torn packet close, her small hands trembling as if the food might vanish if she let go. Her lips moved quickly, chewing every bite with a hunger that came from days of emptiness. Each mouthful was swallowed with tears sliding down her cheeks, mixing dirt with salt. For the first time in many cycles, her body felt warmth inside instead of pain. The human stood nearby, silent, his eyes scanning the crowd that still lingered. Some watched with disgust, whispering that he had shamed himself. Others watched with curiosity, their stares heavy but not cruel, and a few eyes hidden in the shadows looked at him with something darker, resentment. The child paused after a few bites, lifting her gaze toward him, her alien eyes, glowing faintly under the light of the market lamps, locked with his. She seemed unsure if she should keep eating or stop, but the human nodded gently, his voice calm and steady. "Eat," he said. "It is yours." Her throat tightened as she forced down another bite. To her, the food was more than survival. It was proof that someone had seen her as a child and not a curse. The cruel words of the crowd still echoed in her mind. But this human's kindness had broken through the noise. The mocking aliens tried again to laugh. But the sound was weak now. What good will it do? One spat. "She will starve again tomorrow." "Better to leave her now than waste pity," another muttered. But no one joined in this time. The silence of others weighed heavier than their jeers. The human's calm stare had stolen their power. The child finished the last of the ration, her hands clutching the empty packet as if it were treasure. Her breathing slowed, her eyes closing for a moment as her body began to remember strength. Then she whispered in a voice almost too small to hear, You gave me life." The human knelt again, lowering himself to her level. His face softened, his tone gentle. "No," he said. "You were alive already. I only reminded the world." The child's eyes widened, her lips trembling as tears fell again. But this time they were not only from hunger. A murmur spread through the marketplace. Some aliens turned away, ashamed. Others whispered, "Why would a human care for her? What does he gain?" But in their hearts many felt something stir. A memory of when kindness had once touched them. It was uncomfortable, it was powerful, and it was undeniable. The human extended his hand, palm open. "Come," he said softly. "You are not alone anymore." The child looked at his hand as though it were a bridge between two worlds. Her small fingers shook, hesitant. Her whole life she had been mocked, kicked aside, treated like dirt. Could she trust this strange man who had given up his own meal? The silence stretched, the crowd waiting. Then slowly, carefully, she placed her tiny hand into his. Her skin was rough and cold, but her grip, weak as it was, held a spark of trust. Gasps rose around them, some of anger, some of disbelief, some of wonder. The human helped her to her feet, her legs trembling under her small weight. For the first time, she stood not as a mocked orphan, but as someone worth protecting. The marketplace no longer seemed so large to her. For beside her stood someone who refused to let her fall, but danger still lingered. From the far side of the market, shadows moved, eyes watching with growing hatred. The kindness of the human had not gone unnoticed. There were those who wanted the child gone, and his act of mercy had disturbed their plans. Whispers carried through the air like cold wind. "She should not live," one voice hissed from the shadows. "She carries a cursed bloodline," another murmured. And though the child could not hear them clearly, she felt the fear creep back into her heart. The human sensed it too, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the edges of the crowd. He had traveled long enough to know when danger was near. But he did not release her hand. Instead, he tightened his grip gently, giving her silent assurance that he would not leave. The child leaned against him, her body weak but her spirit clinging to his strength. For the first time in her short life, she felt the warmth of safety, and yet in the depth of her heart she feared this safety might not last. But for this moment she let herself believe. The human began to lead her away from the center of the market. Each step was slow, deliberate, as the crowd parted reluctantly to let them pass. Some moved aside with respect, others with resentment. But none dared block his path. The sight of the human and the child walking hand in hand left a mark on every eye that saw it. And though whispers followed, the story had begun to spread. A story of a starving child fed by a human. A story of kindness in a place where kindness had been forgotten. The market had witnessed something rare, something powerful, and none who had seen it would forget. As the human and the child disappeared into the maze of streets, the air in the marketplace remained heavy. The jeers and laughter were gone, replaced by uneasy silence. Something had changed that day, though none could yet see how far it would reach. But one thing was certain. The simple act of sharing a meal had lit a spark that no darkness could easily put. The market was not the same after what they had seen. The laughter that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by whispers that clung to the streets like smoke. Every alien who had mocked the starving child now felt the heavy weight of silence. The image of the human giving away his last meal stayed in their minds. Whether they wished it or not, the child clung to his side as he guided her through the crowd. Her tiny hand gripping his tightly, she was weak, but the food had given her just enough strength to stand. Her eyes shifted nervously from face to face. Would they spit at her again? Would they throw stones? But this time the crowd did not mock, instead they stared. Their gazes sharp with judgment or soft with something else, something unfamiliar to her. Pity. An old alien merchant stepped forward, his voice rough. "Why waste your food on her, human?" he asked. "She is nothing. She will bring you only trouble." The words carried through the marketplace, and many nodded, but the human did not stop walking, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "She is a child," he said, "and no child deserves to starve." The merchant's mouth fell shut, his eyes lowering, for though he had spoken against the girl, in his heart he knew the human was right. Others began to murmur, "He shamed us all," one said. "No," another replied. "He reminded us of what we forgot." The child's ears twitched as she heard them, and she felt a strange warmth inside. Never before had she heard anyone speak for her. Never before had voices risen to defend her instead of curse her. She glanced at the human, her heart pounding with something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. But not all were moved by kindness. At the far end of the market, a group of tall, armored aliens pushed through the crowd, their faces dark with anger. They had been watching from the shadows, and they did not like what they had seen. The leader snarled, his eyes burning with hatred as he pointed at the child. "She should not live," he growled. "Her kind is cursed, her bloodline forbidden." Gasps spread through the crowd. The child shrank against the human, her small frame trembling. The human stepped forward, placing himself between her and the advancing figures. His stance was steady, his hand near the strap of his pack though it held no weapon. His voice was calm but filled with steel. "You will not touch her," the leader laughed, the sound harsh and cruel. "And what will you do, human? You have no allies here, no power, no food." The crowd shifted nervously, some backing away in fear, but others stayed, their eyes darting between the human and the armored figures. For the first time, the market had to choose. Would they stand with cruelty or with courage? The child pressed closer, her voice trembling. "They will kill you." "They always win," she whispered. But the human bent his head, his voice quiet but certain. "Not today," he said. "Not while I stand." The crowd stirred again, their whispers louder now. "Why does he care for her?" someone asked. "Because he remembers what we forgot," another answered softly. The armored aliens heard the voices and sneered. "You fools," their leader roared. "She is nothing but a burden, a disease among us. Do not let his weakness infect you." Yet even as he spoke, a few figures in the crowd stepped closer to the human. A merchant who had once mocked the child lowered his head and muttered, "She is just a child." A mother with her own small one in her arms whispered, "Would I want my child left to starve if it were her?" One by one, doubts spread. The cruelty that had once united the crowd now began to crack. The leader of the armored group felt the shift and grew angrier. His eyes blazed as he stepped forward, his hand reaching for the child, but the human raised his arm. Blocking him, the crowd gasped, silence falling heavy again. The child's heart raced, her wide eyes staring at the human who stood firm against giants. Tension thickened the air like a storm about to break. The crowd's whispers swirled, voices of fear, of anger, of awakening. And in that moment, everyone knew something had changed. This was no longer about a starving child or a ration of food. It was about what they would allow themselves to become. The human's voice rose, louder this time, cutting through the heavy air. "You mock her because she is weak," he said, his eyes locked on the leader. "You despise her because she reminds you of your cruelty." He turned slowly, his voice carrying to every ear in the market. "But remember this, one day, You will need mercy too, the words struck deep. Some turned their faces away in shame. Others clenched their fists in anger. But all of them felt the truth in his voice. The leader snarled, but for the first time he hesitated. The strength of the crowd no longer fully belonged to him. The human had shifted something in their hearts. And though danger had not passed, a seed had been planted. The child looked up at the human, her eyes wide. She had lived her life in shadows, mocked and hated. Yet here, in front of all, someone had called her a child. Someone had given her worth. Tears filled her eyes as she clung tighter to his side. For the first time she believed she might survive. And though the market still shook with tension, though danger had only just begun, one truth could no longer be erased. The crowd had seen kindness, and kindness could not be unseen. The market still trembled with unease. The crowd torn between fear of the armored aliens and the quiet strength of the lone human. The child hid behind him, clutching the empty ration packet as if it were a shield. Her heart pounded in her chest, her thin frame trembling, but her eyes no longer looked completely hopeless. For the first time someone stood for her, and the world seemed less cruel. The armored leader sneered, his voice rising above the whispers. You think this child is innocent, human? You do not know who she is. You do not know what blood flows in her veins. The words slithered across the marketplace, tightening the air like a rope around every throat. The human turned his head slightly, his sharp gaze steady. She is a child, he said again, and that is all that matters. But the leader laughed, harsh and bitter. Then let her tell you herself, he spat. Let her show you the truth you defend. The child froze, her small hands curling into fists. Her breath came shallow, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head slowly, whispering, no, please, not here. But the human knelt beside her, his voice gentle. They mock you because they fear something. What is it, child? What is it they are hiding? The crowd leaned closer, their whispers soft and sharp. What does he mean? One asked. Why would they fear a starving orphan? Another muttered. The tension grew as every gaze pressed on the child, waiting for an answer. Her lips trembled, her voice breaking as she spoke. My kind. We are hated, she whispered. Our race was marked long ago. We were blamed for storms, for sickness, for war. She lowered her eyes, tears falling. They called us cursed. They said our blood brings ruin. So they cast us out, hunted us, left us to starve. Gasps echoed through the market. Even those who despised her leaned closer, wanting to hear more. Her small voice shook as she continued. My parents were taken when I was very small. I never saw them again. I wandered. And when people saw me, they mocked, they spat, they struck me. They said it was better if I died. Better if no one remembered what I was. The human's chest tightened as he listened. His jaw set like stone, he glanced at the armored aliens. Their smirks full of cruelty. Their silence confirming her words. This was no lie. The hatred in their eyes was proof enough. He looked back at the child, his hand resting on her shoulder. You survived, he said softly. And that makes you stronger than all of them. Her eyes widened, as if the idea was something she had never allowed herself to believe. But the armored leader snarled, cutting through the moment. Her people are dangerous, human, he shouted. Their blood carries storms, their presence draws misfortune. Do you wish to bring ruin upon yourself? The crowd shifted, some nodding in fear, others hesitating. Caught between superstition and what they had just witnessed, the human stood tall again, his voice steady and clear. I have traveled through many worlds, he said. I have seen storms, wars, and hunger. But I have never seen a child bring ruin. Only cruelty does that. The words struck the crowd like a blade through fog. Murmurs rose, some of agreement, some of denial, but all were shaken. For deep in their hearts they knew he spoke truth. It was not the child's blood that brought ruin. It was their own hatred. The child pressed closer against him, her small voice barely a whisper. Why do you defend me? You don't even know me. The human looked down at her, his eyes calm. Because no one should stand alone against the world, he said. And because you deserve a chance to live, not just to survive. Tears filled her eyes again. But these were different for the first time. They were not only from pain, but from something new. Gratitude, the crowd saw it too. The fragile spark between the child and the human. It unsettled them, challenged everything they believed. The armored leader growled in fury. You dare defy the truth of our people, human? You dare protect this cursed bloodline? His hand reached for his weapon, a curved blade that glinted under the light. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in fear. But the human did not move. He placed himself firmly between the child and danger. His voice like thunder, "Touch her, and you will answer to me." The silence was deafening. The child's tiny hand clutched his jacket, her heart racing for the first time. She did not feel like prey waiting for the end. For the first time, she felt someone would fight for her. The crowd held its breath. Would blood be spilled in the market? Or would something greater rise from this moment? No one knew. But one truth was already clear. The hidden truth of the child's past had been revealed, and the human's choice to stand beside her had lit a fire that could not be easily put out. The marketplace was no longer just a place of trade. It had become a battlefield of silence and fear. The child's hidden truth had been spoken aloud, and now every eye saw her not only as a starving orphan, but as a spark of something greater. But where there is truth, danger follows. The armored leader's hand gripped his curved blade tightly, his eyes fixed on the human with burning hatred. "You dare protect her, human? Then you have chosen your own death," he snarled. His voice echoed across the stalls, stirring panic among the merchants and shoppers. Some backed away quickly, afraid of bloodshed, while others stayed rooted, unable to turn from what was about to happen. The child clung to the human's side, her small frame trembling. Her voice shook as she whispered, "They will kill you. They always kill anyone who helps us." But the human placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Steady and calm. Not today," he said. "Not while I breathe." The leader raised his weapon. The steel glinting under the pale lights, his followers stepped forward as well, armored boots striking the ground in unison. Their numbers were many, their strength undeniable. The human had no weapon, no allies, only his will and his courage. The crowd gasped as the circle closed around him. Whispers rippled like waves. "Foolish human, he will die," one said. "No," another murmured. "Look at his eyes. He does not fear them." The child's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run, to hide. But her legs felt locked in place, and yet she could not let go of his jacket, for if she did, the world would swallow her whole. The leader lunged forward, his blade flashing. The human shifted quickly, pulling the child behind him. The strike missed her by inches, sparks flying as the blade struck the stone wall. The crowd screamed, the sound of chaos rising. But the human did not move back, his stance firm, his eyes unshaken. "You fight to kill a starving child," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Does that make you strong, or does it show the world your weakness?" The words struck like arrows, and the crowd stirred uneasily. Some who had hated the child now looked at the leader with doubt. What kind of strength is measured by striking the defenseless? The leader roared in fury, "Silence! She must die, and so must you." He raised his blade again, his followers surrounding the pair like wolves circling prey. The human's mind raced. He had no weapon, no plan, but he had resolve. He spread his arms slightly, his body shielding the girl completely. Then from the edge of the crowd, a voice rose strong and clear, "Enough!" All eyes turned, and a merchant stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "She is only a child," he said. "And he is right. Our cruelty has gone too far." Another voice followed, this time a mother holding her child. "If it were my daughter, I would pray for someone to help her too," she whispered, loud enough for all to hear. Her words stirred something deep in the crowd. One by one, murmurs rose, hesitant, fragile, but growing stronger. The armored leader spun in rage. "You dare defy me?" he shouted. But now he saw the faces around him no longer bowed in blind obedience. The human's act of mercy had cracked their fear, and courage was seeping through the cracks. The child's eyes widened as she heard the voices for the first time in her memory. Strangers spoke not to mock her, but to defend her. Her small hand clutched the human's tighter, her heart whispering that maybe, just maybe, she was not cursed after all. The leader lunged again, this time aiming at the human's chest. The crowd gasped, but the human moved swiftly. He grabbed a wooden staff from a nearby stall. Blocking the strike, the blade screeched against the wood, but the staff held firm. The crowd roared in shock. The fight no longer just survival, but a symbol. The human's voice thundered as he pushed back. "You call me weak for giving food, but strength is not in cruelty. Strength is in protecting those who cannot fight." The crowd erupted in shouts, some cheering, some crying out in fear. But no one could look away. The leader stumbled back, his pride wounded more than his body. His followers hesitated, glancing at the shifting crowd. The human stood tall, the staff in his hands. The child behind him, her eyes shining with new light. This was no longer a fight between one man and an army. It had become a fight between cruelty and compassion. The leader snarled, spitting on the ground. "This is not over, human," he hissed. "You will regret this choice," he signaled to his men. And though their eyes burned with anger, they followed him retreating into the shadows. The market was left in heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the child's shaky breaths. The human lowered the staff slowly, his body tense but unbroken. He knelt to the girl, brushing dust from her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now. She shook her head, tears brimming in her glowing eyes. You stood against them," she whispered. "I told you," he replied gently. "You are not alone anymore." The crowd remained frozen, their hearts unsettled. They had seen something that would not leave them. A starving child defended, a human unarmed yet unyielding. Kindness had stood against cruelty, and it had not fallen. And though danger had stepped back for now, everyone knew it lingered close, waiting. The child's enemies would not rest. The true storm had only begun. The market was quiet after the armored men retreated. The stalls that once rang with shouts of trade now stood in uneasy silence. Every eye watched the human and the child, the strange pair who had faced cruelty and refused to bow. The air was heavy, not with laughter, not with scorn, but with something new, reflection. The human stood tall, his chest rising and falling slowly as his grip on the staff loosened. He was tired, but his spirit did not bend. The child clung to his side, her glowing eyes still wet with tears, her small frame pressing against him for safety. She could not believe what she had seen. All her life she had been mocked, hunted, called cursed, but here, someone had stood for her when the whole world turned away. The crowd began to shift, murmurs rippling through them like restless waves. "He risked his life for her," one whispered. "Why? She's nothing to us," another muttered. But the words sounded weaker now, uncertain. Others shook their heads, their voices heavy. "No child should starve in the dust," a merchant said quietly. "We forgot our hearts." The human's eyes scanned the faces, sharp and steady. "Kindness is not weakness," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the stalls. "Strength is not in how hard you strike, but in how fiercely you protect." His words struck deep, some lowering their heads in shame, others frowning as if the truth unsettled them, but none could deny it. They had seen it with their own eyes. The child turned her face up toward him, her voice trembling but strong enough to carry. "No one has ever protected me," she said softly. "No one but you." The human's heart tightened, but he gave her a small nod. "Then from this day forward," he said, "you will never stand alone." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time, her small heart felt something she had never dared hope for. Belonging. Yet not all in the crowd were moved. Some turned away, muttering curses under their breath. Fear still held them. Fear of her bloodline, fear of change. But others stepped forward. Hesitant but sincere, one merchant knelt, placing a small loaf of bread before the child. "Here," he said awkwardly. "Food should not be denied to a child." The child stared in shock, her hands trembling as she took it. Her eyes flicked to the human, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank him," he whispered. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you." The merchant bowed his head, guilt heavy in his eyes. A mother stepped forward next, her own child clutching her arm. She knelt low so her little one's eyes met the alien child's. "She is not cursed," the mother said firmly. "She is just like my daughter, hungry, afraid, needing love." Her words rippled through the crowd like a spark through dry wood. The silence shifted, and slowly the wall of cruelty began to crack. The armored leader's threat still echoed in the air. Everyone knew danger had not vanished, only withdrawn for a time. But something greater had been planted in the market that day. A seed of change born from a simple act of sharing. The human lifted the child gently into his arms. Her small body rested against his chest. Her heartbeat weak but steady, she whispered, "They will come again." Her eyes filled with worry. He nodded, his face calm. "Then we will face them again," he said, "but next time, we will not face them alone." He turned and began to walk through the market. This time the crowd did not block his path. Some moved aside with respect, others with quiet shame, but more than a few nodded their heads, silently honoring the courage they had witnessed. The child rested her head on his shoulder, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Yet for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to sleep without fear. For in his arms, she felt safe. For in his words, she believed she had worth. The market slowly returned to life after they disappeared into the streets. But nothing was the same. The story of the starving child and the human who shared his last meal would spread. From mouth to mouth, from stall to stall, from city to city, it would become more than a tale of hunger. It would become a lesson whispered in quiet homes, a reminder in hard times, that humanity's light could shine even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And somewhere in the shadows, the armored leader seethed with rage, his eyes burning with promises of vengeance. The child's survival was not the end, but the beginning of a storm. The human knew this, the child feared this, but neither turned away. For together they had found something stronger than fear. They had found trust, hope, and the courage to stand, and no blade, no cruelty, no hatred could take that away. The stars above the city glimmered faintly as night fell. The human carried the child toward an uncertain future, but in her small heart one truth rang clear. She was no longer just the starving alien mocked by the world. She was alive, she was seen, and she was not alone. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something greater. A new beginning, born from one meal, one act of kindness, one human who chose compassion over survival, and the galaxy would never forget it.